I wasn't looking for 1806 when I started this investigation. I was looking for 1820. That's the year Antarctica was officially discovered. The year the last credible Tartaria references begin their disappearance from major encyclopedias. The year the narrative hardens into something that starts to look less like history and more like a decision. But 1806 kept surfacing. Not in major texts, not in the kind of sources that get cited in university syllabi, in the margins, in the footnotes of atlases that nobody reads anymore, in catalogue entries from libraries that have been reorganized so many times, their original acquisition records no longer exist. And what I found there in 1806 is something I haven't been able to set down. There is a map, an atlas entry, to be precise, published in 1806 by a cartographic house that, by 1820, had stopped printing it, not revised it, not corrected it, stopped printing it entirely. The plates were retired, the edition was not reprinted, and when I started asking why, the answers I received were the kind of answers trained institutions give when they don't want you to look closer. Out of print. No longer relevant. Superseded by more accurate surveys. But here's the thing about 1806. Cartographic knowledge doesn't become irrelevant in 14 years. Not in the 19th century, when surveys were conducted on foot, when coastlines were mapped from ship decks, when the accumulation of geographic knowledge moved slowly and deliberately. Maps were corrected, they were updated, they were reprinted with annotations, with new borders overlaid on old ones. They were not simply stopped, unless what they contained was not an error, unless what they contained was something that could not be corrected, only removed. Let me tell you what the 1806 entry shows. The atlas in question contains a full-page plate dedicated to what it labels Great Tartary, not as a vague geographic designation, not as a rough territorial sketch. As a political and administrative entity, it shows internal divisions, named provinces, road networks, river routes, population centers, administrative capitals. This is not the Tartaria of conventional academic dismissal, the one they wave away as a cartographer's shorthand for that big unmapped region beyond Russia. This map shows a functioning civilization with internal structure, with governance architecture, with the kind of documented detail that only comes from on-the-ground knowledge, from surveys, from people who were there and came back with specific information. And by 1820 it is gone. Not revised, gone. The edition that follows, 14 years later, does not redraw the borders. It does not relabel the provinces. It does not note that previous surveys were inaccurate. It simply removes the plate. The page where Great Tartary appeared is replaced with a different regional division. Central Asia, rendered now as a collection of smaller designations. Russian territories to the north, Chinese territories to the east, unnamed steppe to the center. The administrative structure has vanished, the road networks are gone, the named population centers no longer exist, and nobody explains why. Here is the pattern I want you to hold. In 1800, if you were an educated European and someone handed you an atlas, you would find Tartaria. Not in one atlas, in most of them, the British atlases, the French atlases, the German atlases, the Dutch atlases, all carrying some version of this territory, all treating it with the same casual certainty they reserved for France or Spain or the Ottoman Empire. It is there, it is labelled, it is assumed. By 1830, it is absent, across all of them, not just one publisher, not just one country. All of them, simultaneously, arrive at the same conclusion. This territory does not require its own designation. The name is retired. The civilization, if that's what it was, is quietly filed under the regions that now claim to contain it. The coordination required for that silence is extraordinary. I want to be precise about what I mean. Cartographic publishing houses in the early 19th century were competing institutions. British map makers did not coordinate with French ones. German atlases did not defer to Russian imperial surveys. These were commercial enterprises with reputations built on the comprehensiveness and accuracy of their geographic knowledge. They corrected each other publicly. They competed for government contracts on the basis of superior detail. They did not agree on anything easily, but they agreed on this, all of them, within the same 2-decade window. The name disappears, the territory is subdivided. The civilization, whatever it was, is absorbed into the administrative claims of surrounding empires without documentation, without explanation, without a single surviving account of what that transition actually looked like on the ground. Now ask yourself what a transition like that actually requires. If Tartaria was a functioning administrative entity in 1806, with road networks and provinces and population centers specific enough to appear on a detailed atlas plate, then the disappearance of that entity from all subsequent cartographic records requires one of two explanations. Either the information was always wrong, which requires us to believe that dozens of competing publishing houses across multiple countries independently maintained the same significant error for centuries without questioning it, or the information was removed, deliberately, coordinately, from the record. The first explanation asks us to believe in a sustained coincidence across generations of professional map makers. The second asks us to believe in coordination, which should be more troubling, except that we've already documented the coordination. The maps don't argue with each other about what replaced Tartaria. They don't offer competing versions of what happened to its provinces. They simply present the replacement as established fact, as if it had always been this way, as if there was nothing to explain. This is not how errors get corrected. This is how information gets managed. Let me tell you about the road network, because this is the detail that collapsed my remaining skepticism. The 1806 plate shows road routes through territory that, according to official history, was largely uninhabited wilderness at the time. Unmapped steppe, trackless expanse, the kind of territory that Russian imperial expansion was supposedly penetrating for the first time in those very decades. But the map shows roads, not rough trade routes, not dotted line speculation, formal road designations of the kind that indicated maintained infrastructure. Infrastructure that would have required engineering, labor, ongoing maintenance. Infrastructure that does not appear in any construction record from the Russian Imperial Archive. Infrastructure that cannot be attributed to any known civilization the official history places in that region at that time. You cannot map roads that don't exist, and you cannot build roads without documentation, without labor records, without the kind of administrative trail that large infrastructure projects inevitably generate. Unless the roads were already there, unless the survey teams that provided data for the 1806 atlas weren't mapping new territory, they were mapping what they found. And what they found was a functioning system that someone else had built. This is where the architectural evidence from previous investigations becomes impossible to separate from the cartographic record. We've documented buildings across Russia, Central Asia, and Mongolia featuring construction precision and architectural scale inconsistent with the technology officially attributed to the cultures credited with building them. No construction records, no supply chain documentation, no workforce accounts, structures that appear in the historical record fully formed without a scaffolding period, without the incremental archaeology that should accompany human settlement of that complexity. The 1806 map suggests something that makes those buildings make sense, not anomalies scattered across a wilderness. Infrastructure nodes, points on a network, stops on roads that connected them to each other and to the administrative centers that the atlas labels with names that no subsequent map preserves. Someone was maintaining those roads. Someone was occupying those buildings. And in the period between 1806 and 1820, whatever system they represented was either destroyed or absorbed so completely that the evidence of its existence required active management to keep out of the cartographic record. Now let me tell you what happened in the libraries. When a cartographic publishing house retires a plate, the physical object doesn't disappear immediately. Plates were expensive to produce. They were stored. They were sometimes sold. The 1806 plate for Great Tartary had to go somewhere, and the editions printed before the retirement had to go somewhere too. Libraries received them, private collectors purchased them, archives catalogued them. What I found when I started tracing those copies is a pattern of quiet disappearance that mirrors the cartographic erasure itself. Libraries that held early 19th century atlas collections report gaps in their holdings, specifically in the years around 1800 to 1815. Not general gaps, specific gaps. The editions that predate the territorial revision are missing at rates that exceed normal loss for the period. Fire, flood, routine disposal of duplicates. All the standard archival explanations appear in the records, but the pattern is too precise. The losses cluster in exactly the editions that would contain the detailed Tartarian administrative plates. The editions from 1820 onward, the ones that already show the revised geography, survive in normal numbers. The editions from before 1800 are present in normal numbers. The window of maximum disappearance centers on the transition period. This is not what random archival loss looks like. And here is the strangest part. When you cross-reference the archival gaps across multiple institutions, multiple countries, the pattern doesn't just repeat, it synchronizes. British Library holdings missing the 1807 to 1812 range. French national collections with documented gaps in the same window. German regional archives with catalogue entries that reference acquisitions never subsequently located. The same years, the same editions, the same silence where the detailed Tartarian plates should be. Institutions do not accidentally lose the same material in the same window, not independently, not across separate countries operating under separate administrative systems with separate archival philosophies. I want to stop here and acknowledge something. I am aware of how this sounds. I understand that I am describing a coordinated, multi-institutional, multinational effort to remove cartographic evidence of a civilization from the historical record. And I understand that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. But I keep returning to a simpler question. If this evidence doesn't point towards suppression, what does explain it? What explains the simultaneous retirement of Tartarian designations across competing publishing houses? What explains the administrative detail on the 1806 plate? Roads and provinces in territory officially unmapped. What explains the archival losses clustering precisely in the transition editions? What explains the uniformity of the replacement narrative across institutions that agreed on nothing else? Coincidence is an explanation. It is not a satisfying one, and the longer you sit with the coincidences, the more they stop feeling like coincidences and start feeling like a pattern with a specific shape, a shape that points toward a specific moment, a specific decision, a specific year when someone, somewhere, decided that the 1806 plate would be the last one to show what was actually there, which raises the question I've been avoiding because it's the hardest one. Not whether the map shows what I believe it shows, not whether the archival losses are what they appear to be, but what was actually there. What does the 1806 plate depict that was so dangerous it required erasure not just from cartographic records but from library holdings across multiple nations. The map answers the shape of the question. It gives us provinces, roads, administrative centers, a functioning political geography. It does not tell us who lived there. It does not tell us what happened to them. It does not tell us whether the roads were empty in 1806 or busy. It does not tell us whether the plate was retired because the civilization had already collapsed, or because it was still present enough to be dangerous to acknowledge. In my previous investigation, I documented the photographic evidence of giant individuals serving in administrative and supervisory roles throughout the 1800s. In the investigation before that, I traced the atmospheric signature of what may have been a civilizational collapse event in the 1780s. The dates keep clustering. The photographs cluster in the same decades as the cartographic transition. The atmospheric events cluster in the decade immediately before it. The architectural anomalies span the entire period. What I'm beginning to understand is that the 1806 map is not an isolated anomaly. It is a timestamp, a record produced at the last moment when knowledge of Great Tartary's administrative reality was still being committed to print, 14 years before the narrative lock, 14 years before the simultaneous retirement of the name across all publishing houses, 14 years before the replacement geography became the only geography. Someone who helped produce that atlas knew what they were documenting, and someone who came after them decided it could not continue to be documented. The roads are still there, buried under centuries of official neglect, misattributed to trade caravans and nomadic drift, but physically present in the landscape, their grades and routes too deliberate for random foot traffic, too enduring for any culture the official record places in that territory. The buildings are still there, stone structures in Central Asia and Russia that predate the civilizations credited with building them, scaled for proportions the official history refuses to examine. And somewhere, in archives that have been reorganized, and in gaps that have been explained away, and in editions that went missing during perfectly understandable institutional transitions, the 1806 plate still exists. Physical objects do not fully disappear. They get misfiled. They get transferred without documentation. They end up in collections nobody has catalogued completely. It is still out there. The last detailed record of something that was supposed to leave no record at all. And if you find it, if you happen to be in an archive, in a library basement, at an estate auction sorting through forgotten atlases, and you come across a plate that shows Great Tartary with internal provinces and road networks and named cities that don't appear on any subsequent map, I want to know about it, because the silence around that plate is not the silence of irrelevance, it is the silence of something that was supposed to stay lost. What happened between 1806 and 1820? What did the surveys actually show? Who made the decision that the next edition would not carry the plate? And what did they know about Great Tartary that they decided the rest of us were better off not knowing? The map existed, the map was suppressed, and the truth it contained is still waiting in whatever archive has it misfiled under something innocuous. The only question is whether anyone is still willing to look.